Good evening, and for my third interview, I would like to introduce you, or actually, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Stuart Johnstone. I'm a former police officer, now crime writer. I live in Edinburgh. I am the author of the Don Collier book series, of which there are two currently, but the third is in production. My personal tastes, I guess, are crime, but also I like fantastical things. I love Neil Gaiman and China Miéville, these kind of authors. Big fan of Margaret Atwood, and I'm pleased to be here and to speak to you.
And I'm pleased to be speaking to you. Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
Yes and no. So it's the first thing I ever wanted to do. I remember telling my teachers I remember when I realized that real people write books. I know that sounds strange, but I think when you're very young, you think that demigods must write books, you know, that they come from some mystical place. And then you realize that real people write books. And so I decided early on that I love books so much that that's what I was going to do for a living. But when you tell your teacher at primary school that you want to be an author, you might as well be telling them that you want to be an astronaut or a football player, and they'll tell you to stick to the sums and by all means write stories, but you'll be realistic about what you want to do for a living. But I wrote stories as a kid into my teens. Most of them were Tolkien ripoffs, but no, I loved writing stories and creating worlds. And I never went very far, but I did love it. But then, as things do, I lost my way with it in my teens, and I didn't do particularly brilliantly at school, and I ended up coming away with. I ended up going to college, and then again underperforming at college, and I just never knew what I wanted to do. And the idea of writing sort of left me by that point. It never seemed like a viable thing to pursue. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. And when that happens, sometimes strange ideas drop into your head. And one of those was join the police. So what was then Strathclyde Police, so the police around the Glasgow area were recruiting, and I thought they would see right through me, that I was no good for that sort of role. But I applied, and at each step of the way I expected to fail, but no, they kept asking me to come back for tests and interviews. And then I had my final interview and they offered me a job, and suddenly I was in uniform, terrified, and traipsing the streets just outside Glasgow, and wondering what the hell I was doing there. Again, the idea of writing, was a far off thing. I was a big reader. I've always been a big reader, and a massive fan of fiction and genre fiction. And so cut to, I guess, 6 or 7 years within a police career, and I was falling out of love with the job a little bit. And at the time, I had just, with my then partner, I just started a business in Edinburgh, a little shop for dogs in the Stockbridge area of Edinburgh. And I guess I was waiting for a point where I was secure enough in the idea that the business was going to do well enough that I could leave the police. And I also began to have aspirations about going back to education. At one point in the police, I was working in a department called operational planning, which is working with the bosses on sort of strategic plans for the police. And I realized at that time that I could write, that I was getting chief inspectors coming to me to write emails for them. I was the office scribe, and I was penning long incident reports, and I had to write a 10,000 word presumption of life report, which I can't talk too much about, but it was a bit of a grim piece of writing. And so I thought, when I left the police, when eventually I got to a comfortable enough point that I thought I could leave, that and work in a dog shop full time, which is great fun, putting the rose tinted glasses back on, pretending the world's a nice place again. after 10 years in the police, I also wanted to go back to education. So I started a degree in English literature, and in the second year, I had to decide whether I wanted to stick with English literature solely, or whether I wanted to go down the creative writing route. And so the stories came back. I was writing short stories for uni, and I'm not the biggest academic. I'm the first to admit the academic essays were doing okay. You know, I was passing, and but it was the stories I was writing that were really getting the good marks, and there was a real sense that I guess I had something, and so I kept writing and I kept writing and kept writing. And some of those short stories did some really strange things very quickly after I started writing. And I was encouraged by my tutors to start sending stuff out. And you're only talking about, you know, a couple of years after I'd taken it back up again. I'd written one short story for uni. The short story was called "The Gospel According to John." Now, John was my tutor constable in the police. And my first novel, Out in the Cold, he's in there all the way through as John, because I never thought anybody would want to publish these stories. So I never bothered to change his name. And I'll come back to that later. It almost got me in trouble. And I've written this short story about an incident in the police in my first year. And it got the best mark that I'd received throughout my university career. And it just so happened that I was on the mailing list for the Edinburgh Book Festival. And the very next email telling me that my essay had been returned was an invitation by the book festival, inviting local authors, Edinburgh-based authors, to send in short stories, because they were looking for emerging Edinburgh writers. Now, I'm not from Edinburgh, but I lived in Edinburgh, so I qualified. And so I sent in this short story, The Gospel According to John, and I was thrilled to find that they wanted me in. They selected me as an emerging writer in 2015. They sent me on a public speaking course because they were about to throw me on stage at the Edinburgh Book Festival, somewhere I'd been going for years and seeing some of the biggest stars in literature, and suddenly I was going to be on stage, and I was terrified. But I got through it, and I told my story, and that story was then published in Gutter magazine, issue 14, which is a kind of prominent literary magazine here in Scotland. And so I was thrilled. You know, I was so young in my writing career, and suddenly I was selected by UNESCO, and I was published. And so I kept going, and then something really strange happened. So I kept in touch with everybody at UNESCO, and we would meet up once a month for a literary salon, which was an excuse to drink free wine and complain about the agents who were ignoring us and the publishers that didn't want to know about our stories. And so we would get drunk once a month, and we would exchange ideas about funding opportunities or competitions that come up and so on. I've never been much of a competition writer because I'm not a literary writer. I'm the first to admit I'm not a poetic writer. I'm not. I wish I was, but I'm not. I do what I do, and I'm happy with that. So, but this particular month, they were talking about a competition that had been set up by the Guardian newspaper, and Stephen King had just released his short story collection, The Bazaar of Bad Dreams, and I love Stephen King. I always have. My mum was the biggest fan, and so we were all going to send in short stories. You know, the competition was set up. You didn't have to be published, and the only criteria was that it had to be inspired by a quotation from one of the stories that was there. And so we all sent in short stories, and I completely forgot about it. And then about a month later, I got an email from the Guardian newspaper saying, "Congratulations, you've been shortlisted for this competition. From the 900 odd stories that were selected, they were reduced down to 6, and mine was one of those. And those six stories were being sent to Stephen King to read. And he would then select a winner. And you know, it was insane. It was insane. And I've been reading Stephen King all my life, and suddenly that week I'm going to work in my doggy shop, thinking, is he reading my story now? And you know, and anyway, I got an email back then from a lovely lady called Philippa Pride, who I still speak to at Hodder in Scotland, his publisher here in the UK, saying that thanks for being involved in the competition. He didn't select your story as the overall winner, unfortunately, but you loved it. And here's what you had to say about it. And she links in this email from Stephen King talking about my story, which is one of my treasured things in the world. And it was just such a thrill. And I wrote back to Philippa saying, you know, don't apologize. You know, this has been amazing. I can really use this in my CV. I'd previously written a novel that didn't go anywhere. My approach letter to agents wasn't particularly impressive, but suddenly things were starting to change. And then I thought that was that. And Philippa went on to say that Stephen's sending you something in the post. I hope you enjoy it. And I have something to show you. I have a prop. Hold on.
Am I going to be really jealous now?
A few weeks later, a copy of his new book turned up. I don't know if this is going to be backwards on the screen, whether you can.
No, it's fine.
And inside is a personal message from the man himself. You can just about read that. To Stuart Johnstone, thank you for your wonderful story. Good luck with your future writing, Stephen King. So this is, you know, if my house was starting to burn right now, this is the thing I would go to first to save. So yeah, that was amazing. And this is all came from short stories that I was writing for uni. And I continued writing these short stories, but I was also working on a novel at the time. Sort of loosely based on some ideas, some experiences from my first year in the police. It was probably more like a horror novel at the time, but the protagonist was a police officer, and so there was a lot of procedural stuff in there. And so my approach letter then, when I finished this novel, my approach letter to agents suddenly carried a bit more water. And I started off with agents in London, you know, trying to be as ambitious as possible. Thinking I'll start with the big agents in London, and then we'll see where we go. And within weeks, I was thrilled that an agent in London got back in touch saying that they're reading the story and don't talk to anybody else. Let me finish this. And anyways, you know, flick to 2 weeks later, I'm on a plane to London for a meeting with my now agent Joanna. And she had big ideas to change the story from a horror novel to a crime novel, given my past experiences. And I think that the procedural elements of the novel were stronger than the sort of horror elements. And so I spent the next year tidying it up and, on her advice, changing certain elements. And then we went looking for a publisher, and I'm doing all the talking. I'm sorry.
You carry on.
But this is the story. So yeah, and then we had a few offers on the book, and there was one standout offer from some lovely people at Allison and Busby, who saw this as a series of books. So I was thrilled with the idea of not only having this one published, but being able to write more. And so yeah, so 2020, Out in the Cold came out. This one. And then in July this year, the follow-up, Into the Dark. This one was released. This one's set in Edinburgh, and it's been amazing. And I'm now writing books, and it's been a blur since starting writing short stories at uni to now. And we're now working on book 3 in the series, and yeah, it's been amazing. And yeah, and as you're aware, I was at Bloody Scotland last week. Reading an excerpt from the first book, and it's been fantastic. I've had a ball, despite the fact that it's all come out during lockdowns and so on. It's been nothing but fantastic, and I'm having a great time. Yeah.
Yeah, you were the one of the spotlight authors at Bloody Scotland, which must have been pretty cool.
Yeah, that all came about. I was speaking to my agent. No, I was just speaking to the publisher, and they'd had an email from somebody at Bloody Scotland. Apparently, Out in the Cold only missed out on being shortlisted for the McIlvanney Prize by a small distance. I had no idea that it was even being considered, no idea. But it was one of the organisers said, would Stuart be interested in one of our spotlight slots? And suggested that I get in touch, and so I did, and so I was invited along. And you know, the idea is that you have an up-and-coming author, and they place them with a very established author, shortly before they go on, and I was thrilled that they placed me in front of Kathy Reichs. So yeah, that was a great thrill, particularly speaking in front of a live audience again. I haven't done it since the Edinburgh Book Festival in 2015, so I was nervous, but not nearly as nervous as I was in Edinburgh. I guess the more you do these things, the more confidence it builds, and I had a great time. Yeah, it was really, really lovely.
Yeah, it was fun. And then you get all us weirdos coming up to you after and asking if you want to be interviewed, and you're just like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on, but sure.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of people have books out, and so I think you have to grab every opportunity to be heard. And the publisher I'm with, they may not be the biggest publisher. They don't have the marketing machines that the Penguin Random Houses of the world do. So you have to, enjoy the fact that anybody's interested in speaking to me, then absolutely, I'm interested in speaking to them. I'm happy to chat. The fact that you probably said 5 words in this interview shows that I'm always happy to chat. Yeah.
That's fine. I always say it makes my life easier. You carry on. I'll just sit back and chill and you just talk. It's fine.
You'll say that, but it was 6 o'clock in the morning. You'd be wishing you hadn't said that. But no, yeah, I'm always happy to chat about these stories. It's I still can't really believe that it's happening. There's a certain amount of imposter syndrome, I guess. But I'm thrilled that I'm here, and if it all ends tomorrow, then I have these books and I have Stephen King, and I have enough chat to board dinner guests for the rest of my life.
But I'm sure that's not going to happen. I'm sure you're going to keep going and write loads more.
I hope so.
And I will read yours at some point, which I am proud to have a signed copy of.
Yeah, thank you.
Not quite the same as having one at Stephen King's, but it's fine. I'm fine with that. It's not jealous.
Well, I sent a copy to him via this lady, Philippa Pride. I don't know if he has it, but I sent him a copy of the first one to say thank you, because he's part of how I got started. So I wonder if he has it, wearing his Bucky Thistle top and reading Out in the Cold. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah. People ask me, because obviously I was there and stuff, about what he was like. I'm like, him and Linwood Barclay were comparing toilet stories. Like, genuinely, they were comparing, and they're looking at me like I'm insane. I swear to God, Linwood Barclay ran a trailer park and he was telling Stephen King. Yeah, I still don't think they believe me, but I'm like, I swear that's what they were talking about. Nutcases. It was fun. I take it you saw that. Did you see Stephen King speak?
I did, yeah. It's I always love hearing him speak. I think he's at the point now where he's so famous that he's allowed to get very tangential. He's earned that right. So that's fine. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the first time I've seen him speak live, but yeah, it was awesome. It was worth it. That was the reason I went all the way to Scotland.
Oh, okay, so you're a big Stephen King fan.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, I am too. Like I say, it was a thrill to be part of. Yeah, so actually I didn't even mention part of that story. I forgot. So while we're talking about this, being involved in that competition, I missed this whole part of that story. So he sent this, and that was great. And then I got another prop. Hold on. So another month or so after all of this stuff, this competition with the Guardian competition came out, I got another email from Philippa to say that normally Stephen hates these kinds of competitions. He has to read through dozens of crappy stories to find one passable one. But because they had a team involved reading the 900 stories and whittling down to 6, he felt that the 6 stories that they shortlisted for the competition were of particularly good quality, which was nice to hear. And he also felt that they worked as a collection. So apparently on his suggestion, this came out. This is 6 scary stories selected and introduced by Stephen King. In 2015, I found myself in a short story collection with Stephen King. He wrote a foreword, and then the 6 of us authors are in this book. This is available in hardback and paperback in the US. In the UK, it's audiobook and ebook only. But yeah, so my first major publication was with Stephen King. There you go. There's my Stephen King story. So that was a thrill, and I can't believe I missed that part out in my story.
I know, that's awesome. That's really cool.
It's kind of important. So yeah, so I've got a lot to thank Mr. King for, and I hope one day that I get to do just that in person. It's probably unlikely, but that'd be my dream, to say thank you, because it all started with him. And so me standing on stage in Stirling with my book all starts with Mr. Stephen King. There you go.
So you've started your career like way up here. So
yeah, it's a weird one. It's all gone in reverse, isn't it? I start off with possibly the #1 best-selling author in the world and a book with him, but then I have to come all the way back down and get started on my own right. But that was fine, you know. That's a thrill as well, as going out on my own and not having the back of, you know, Stephen King. So no, it was lovely, but being part of that project was so important, not just to kind of get an agent involved and so on, but it really gave me the confidence to. It suggested I had something, that I knew what I was doing to a degree, and it vindicated the time that I was taking to write these stories when I should have been doing more productive things. And you know, so yeah, I have this lovely existence in Edinburgh now. I have my little shop for dogs. I have a lovely team that look after the place, and I do deliveries around Edinburgh. I'm carrying big sacks of dog food around Edinburgh in the mornings, and then when I'm done there in the afternoon, I find a cafe near to where I live, and I got on with writing my police stories. And yeah, it's I'm very lucky. Yeah, it's great.
And so you said you're on book 3, so you're planning to carry on writing more and more?
I will keep writing until they tell me to stop. Absolutely. So I'm on book 3. I have a sort of plan for for this series to continue. And so in the second book in the first book we have Don Collier, the main character. He's in a village called Stratharder, where everything takes place. I'm from the northwest of Scotland, from a tiny town called Dalmally, just outside of Oban. And Stratharder is loosely based on that hometown of mine. I changed the title because I'm not always kind about the place, and you know, I kind of want to go back now and again. But you know, announcing that on interviews probably undoes that theory, that tactic. But in the second book, we find Don moving to Edinburgh. His ex-boys find him there. And the third book, we're back in Edinburgh, and I can't say too much without spoiling the second book, but he is investigating a series of drug deaths, which nobody really takes too much attention of in the beginning, but then suddenly it becomes a big thing, and he's at the center of the investigation. And yeah, and there's a sort of second part of the story where we're following a young man who's got caught up in all of this, and he's kind of fighting for his life, and their 2 stories are linked, and they'll come together at some point in the book. So it's been good getting started on a new one. It's always hard starting a novel. It's easier once you get into it and you can really get into the flow. But I'm getting there now, and yeah, and so we know that the book 3 is coming out, and we're still to chat to the publisher about where things will go ultimately, but I'm hoping there'll be more books to come. Fingers crossed.
Are you finding it easier now you're on book 3 to write and go through the whole editing process and stuff, and do you know your characters better to write them?
Certainly, I know the characters better, that's for sure. They're very 3-dimensional in my head now. We have a certain character in the first book, Rowan, who I was really fond of, but I just didn't see her taking part in the second book, but she's come back for the third. So it's lovely to have Rowan back. And so that's certainly easier. In terms of the editing, yeah, I kind of edit as I go. Although usually when I get to the end of the first draft, I think I have something that's almost finished. And then you start rereading and you think, oh no, there's so much work to be done. So that'll probably happen again. Every time I go through the process, I think I'm so much better at it. There'll be far less to do. But no, undoubtedly there'll be lots to do there. But my favorite part of the process is the blank page. I know that different writers have different preferences. I know that a lot of people like going back through a novel and the fine tuning. But no, I'm a big lover of the blank page. I love seeing what's going to come out, because sometimes I don't really know until you get to the end of the day and you look back and you think, wow, who knew that was coming? And that's the biggest thrill for me, is the blank page. Yeah.
And would you consider setting your books outside Scotland?
I don't see why not. I think when you have a strong central character, particularly in a job like the police, which although Police Scotland is a sort of single unit, I mean, when I worked in the police, I worked with police officers from other areas on different things. You have cross-border investigations all the time. You have, criminals don't respect borders, unfortunately. So I don't see why not. If it's an excuse to go somewhere nice and do some research, then why not? At the moment, he's finding his feet as an investigator. I think one thing I did slightly differently than a lot of authors do is that I started Don's story when he was very early in his career. And the opening chapter of the first book is Don Collier in uniform in his first year as a police officer. That first chapter, actually, I don't know if you remember from when I stood up in front of the crowd and I explained that the first chapter of the first book is based very much on an incident that I attended in my first year, something that haunted me, and I knew that I would have to get down on paper. And I thought that would be a short story, but when I wrote it down, it really much felt like a jumping off point for something bigger, and so then became the novel. And so we start Don's police career right at the beginning, which I think is a bit unusual for a crime novel. Normally you have a kind of hardened DI or a DCI somewhere in the middle or towards the end of their career, but I wanted my officer to be in uniform. For me, the most dynamic part of my police career, and I worked in CID for a little while, but the most dynamic area of policing is uniform. You're a slave to the radio. You go where you're told, and you don't know what you're going into. No matter how well described it is in the radio, it very seldom resembles whatever it is you end up attending. So that's a really dynamic part of policing, and I wanted that to be part of my stories, because you don't see that often in crime fiction. Uniformed officers. It's often the reactionary CID that attend cases, and then you unravel from working backwards, and that's usually the way crime novels take shape. And I'm not saying that won't happen with future novels, but certainly I like the idea of being at ground zero when something happens, and then working the case from there, because that was my experience with the police. In my 10 years, that was the majority of what I was doing, and it was interesting to see that.
Yeah, I imagine you have tons of interesting stories, and not many of which you could share, I would imagine.
Yeah, or certainly I need to change them well enough that I can share them, or I can certainly put them down on paper. I mentioned earlier that before we started the interview, that my tutor constable in the police was a guy called John. John was a lovely man. He was, he still is lovely. He's not gone anywhere. He just retired. That's why the past tense. So John was 55 or 54 when I joined the police as a 25-year-old. So we were absolutely opposite ends of the career. At that time, it was a 30-year career. So John was in the last 2 years of his career when I started. So I had John for my entire probation period, the 2 years, and and we formed a lovely relationship. He taught me very much about not just to be a good police officer, a moral police officer, but also to be a nice person. And yeah, it was very much a sort of father figure to me, John. And so I was really fond of him. And so when I started writing this story, this is a long time before anybody knew who I was, and even a long time before Stephen King entered my life. I started writing this story, and I didn't even bother to change John's name, because why should I? You know, if it isn't going to be published, it's easier for me to see him as John, so I kept him as John. And I kind of forgot about it. And you know, I was writing and rewriting. Eventually, the publisher got involved, and literally a couple of weeks before it went to print, I got an email from Alison and Busby saying, "Oh, we were speaking to your agent, and she was saying that John's a real person." Now, I thought they thought this was going to be some interesting anecdote that they could use in their marketing or something. And I said, yeah, John is absolutely a real guy, you know. And they said, yeah, legal have been in touch. And, you know, although I don't use his surname, he's so well described in the book, or so hopefully accurately described in the book, that they felt this was a problem. And just to make sure that you have John's permission, to which point I had to admit that I haven't spoken to John in 15 years. John was long retired, and you know, and I was long retired even. Not retired, I left. I'm not that old. So I said, look, I have no idea where John is in the world. I wasn't even sure if he was alive. So they said, yeah, this is a problem. We could end up with looking at last minute rewrites if we can't get John's permission. So I went on to Facebook looking for John, and there he was on Facebook. Of all things, John was such a Luddite. I couldn't believe I found him on Facebook. So I got in touch with John, sent him a message saying, hi, how are you doing? Some interesting things have been happening with me. Any chance we can have a chat? This is between lockdowns 1 and 2, so we're allowed to travel. And I went out to visit John at his home in Lanark. And I had to let him know that he was the character in the story, and would he be okay with that? And he was okay with it. And in fact, I think he was really flattered. Because although I'm quite honest about John's physical appearance in the book, I'm also very honest about his character and his warmth and all those attributes that I tried to learn from. So yeah, I reacquainted with my tutor constable after all those years, because I had to, because of legal problems. And but it was lovely to see him again, and it was thrilling to give him a copy of the book and to say thank you for all those years of teaching me to be a nice guy.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I bet he was thrilled. Have you snuck any of the funny stories into the books yet?
Oh yes, there's plenty of those. There's plenty of truth in the pages of the book. There's enough changes that I can't get myself into trouble. Famous last words, right? But there's a lot of truth in those stories. The character of Rowan in the first book is very much based on my friend Stephanie from the police, but she's aware, she's read the book, and she's happy with that. But there's a lot of stories in there that are based very much in truth. Yeah, it made the first book pretty easy to write, because anytime I was searching for what happened next, and I had a story to pop in there. And so yeah, I mean, I worked with a lot of great people in the police. I met a few bad apples as well, and they're also in the book, but I won't name names. So I had a whole range of characters just ready to go. I didn't have to rely on fiction too much to write the first book. So yeah, I was able to rely on a lot of my experiences certainly from that first book. Yeah, sure.
And did you still have to do a lot of research, or was it just your own experiences?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I've been out of the police long enough that research is a really big thing. And in fact, if you look at the acknowledgement sections of each of the books, there's various names mentioned, because I have to go begging for details. And then moving into the third book now, we're into a sort of different territory with Dawn as an investigator now rather than uniform. And I'm having to beg for information from departments that I never really previously had too much to do with. So it's trickier, but we're getting there. I'm getting to people now with a lot of emails and a lot of begging and a lot of sending out copies of the book to get people to help me, because I have an idea where this investigation is going to go, and unfortunately it then takes me out of my realm of experience. And so I think if I'm going to push this idea that I am an ex-police officer, so you can expect some authenticity, then I think I have to go that bit further. When things go out with, as I say, that realm of experience, I have to work that bit harder to make sure that authenticity is there. And I've read so many crime novels that don't really resemble my experience as a police officer, so I don't want to fall into that trap of pure fiction. I want to keep it authentic, and so research is a big part of it.
And before we started recording, you said that you read a lot of different genres. So would you consider writing in any of those?
Yes, and I have, and I do. I think much to my agent's dismay. So no, I do. I read, for every crime novel that I read, I maybe read another 3 or 4 other things. And yeah, horror, dystopia, fantasy, or new weird is a kind of new category that kind of encircles a lot of authors that I really like, and this kind of stuff. I love reading all of this kind of thing, and even if the published stuff doesn't kind of fully resemble that sort of writing, I think I take a lot from reading a lot of this stuff. I think you really need to stretch yourself as a writer. I think you really need to stretch yourself as a reader. I don't want to read crime fully and then write crime fully. I want to experiment with other things, even if nothing gets published. I'm very sure that by trying these other avenues and reading these other things, that it maybe gives an extra dimension to my own writing. And throughout the novels, for example, in the first 2 novels, there's a very light element of the supernatural or the uncanny that appears in these 2 books. And I want to continue that. I don't want to turn off crime readers by introducing too much of the supernatural, but I like the idea that, so in this case, for example, our main character has a lot of intuition. It's what makes him a good police officer. But now and again, his intuition seems to spike. It seems to be off the chart, and it's what makes him stand out as a police officer. And it gives me an element to play with of genre fiction that I really enjoy reading. So yeah, I think Mr. Stephen King is following me into my books as well. I'm a big fan. And so having a little element of the supernatural to play with, along with what is otherwise pretty hard-nosed police procedural stuff, where you can expect to find out a lot about how police officers not only work but also live. Again, it's not a lot of what you'll see in crime novels, where you'll have a pretty 2-dimensional investigator. I also wanted to kind of show what the impact of a job like the police has in your personal life, and because it's huge, it's massive. You can't get involved. You can't do well in a job like that without really throwing yourself into it, which involves shifts, and it involves dealing with the worst things that society can throw at you. And if you meet someone who's been in the police for a long time and they tell you that hasn't had an effect on their psyche or on their character, then they're not being entirely truthful, because it can't. It's impossible. And so writing these novels gives me an opportunity to explore that as well, having that personal experience where you experience these things and how that affects you and how it affects your relationships. And hopefully that's another element of authenticity that comes into these novels.
From what you've written so far, what's been your most fun scene or your most fun chapter to write, and what's been the most difficult?
Ooh, good question. Let me think. The most fun chapter to write. The most difficult chapter, let's start with that. That was the first chapter of the first book. This is this incident that I told you about. Well, I didn't really tell you about the incident, but and I won't tell you the incident because it'll spoil what happens in the chapter. But there was something happened to me in my first year. It's more of a sense of something that almost happened rather than something that did happen. But what almost happened is so unthinkable, so utterly unthinkable that, and it was so close, that's what haunted me. It's this atrocious thing that almost happened. And I couldn't escape it for years. I couldn't escape it. I mean, in fact, when I went to see John, I was desperate to ask him about that night, whether he remembered it in the same way I did. And I only had to kind of utter a few words, and I saw his body tighten up, and I knew that he remembered it in the same way that I did as well. So that was the most difficult chapter to write, but also the easiest chapter to write at the same time, because it's so vivid in my mind. So to answer your question, to use the same incident twice, I'm cheating, I know, but yeah, it was so difficult in terms of reliving it, but very easy to relive it because it's so vivid, even after all these years. Tastes, smells, emotions were right there. Yeah, so it was also a very cathartic experience, I think. I thought about it less after getting it down on paper. So I'm glad to have got it, sort of exercise the demon in a certain respect. But yeah, simultaneously the easiest and hardest chapter so far.
Yep. So when I go up to bed, I'm just going to grab your book and read the first chapter because I'm intrigued now.
That's how we get you.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I will get around to reading them all, but I think I bought 9 books at Bloody Scotland, and that's not including all the arcs I already have to read, and the beaters I have to read, and the blog tour books I have to read. So, you know.
It's not a bad job. Reading books is, yeah, I mean, I quite often, between the writing and the dog shop, I find myself scrabbling for time to read. And at the moment, I go for a walk with my 10-month-old son in the evenings to give mum a break. And there's an old, not abandoned hospital, but a kind of mainly disused hospital near to where I live. It sounds creepier than it is, but they have lovely grounds there, and you can wander around. And although it's in the centre of Edinburgh, it's closed off to traffic mainly, and I can wander around there. And when he falls asleep, there's lots of benches that I can quickly sit down and answer a few emails, and then I get to pick up a book. And so at the moment I'm reading Cloud Atlas. I must be the last person on earth to read Cloud Atlas, but I didn't jump on it like everybody else did. You know, everybody was reading Cloud Atlas. Nobody was talking about it, so I didn't read it. You know, out of belligerence. You know, out of rebelliousness. But I finally picked it up, and I realised what all the hype is about. It's fantastic. So I'm loving that at the moment. So when I get so when he falls asleep, I'm grabbing my 20 minutes to sit down and crack open my book, and yeah. So it really is a privilege.
Yeah, I've not read it yet. Too many arcs. I just have no time.
Yeah.
And doing all these, like my third of tonight. So if only I could get paid for it, then I wouldn't have to go to Greg's anymore.
That's the dream, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. But I wouldn't charge you because it's hard enough already. So bit of a catch-22 that.
Yeah. Well, what you need is publishers to come to you and yeah.
And offer me lots of money, yeah.
That's it. That's the way to do
it. Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but yeah, that would be nice. Totally forgot what I was going to ask you next now. I'm so easily distracted, it's ridiculous. That's why it's easier if you just talk. Oh yeah. Have you made lots of author friends since you became a writer?
Not really, because this has all happened during the most antisocial period in modern history. So I talked about the UNESCO thing, the UNESCO City Literature Trust, So in 2015, I think there were 17 of us selected as emerging writers. And I still have a lovely group of friends amongst them. So I do have some great author friends. In fact, I just bumped into one the other day, David McPherson, who was a short story writer when we were both selected for the City Literature Trust. He went on to do script writing, and I actually bumped into him at the top of Arthur Seat. I don't know if you know Edinburgh well, but it's a big hill. It's a dormant volcano in the city centre of Edinburgh. Honestly, it's true. And it looks down upon the whole thing, and it's an amazing spot in Edinburgh. And I was at the top of there, and I bumped into David, and I was aware of David's most recent success. So I was desperate to say hello to him, find out what he was doing. We were due to go for a pint the next week or two, but he went on to write a script called The Rig, which is just finished filming here in Edinburgh, and it's going to be a massive 6-part Amazon Prime supernatural thriller. So as much as I think I'm doing pretty well, you have these bloody superstars who upstage you at every point. So no, I'm thrilled for David, and I'm looking forward to catching up and hearing what he's been up to and what he's got coming. And but no, there's lots of people there that I made friends with, and we still keep in touch. You know. Edinburgh's it must be one of the smallest cities you'll ever visit. It's certainly one of the smallest capital cities. So we're a tight group here, and so yeah, I do have some lovely friends, and yeah, it's always good to have a moan when things are tough, and somebody to be happy for you when things are going well, and we reciprocate all of these things.
You keep going to the festivals, then you'll get to know everybody as well, I find. So
I'm sure, yeah. Although, despite the fact that I've been talking, I'm actually really shy. So there was a room full of really famous writers at Bloody Scotland, and I didn't do anything about it. I didn't go and say hello to them. You had Val McDermid, Ian Rankin, Doug Johnstone. You had one of my favourites whose name has just gone straight out of my head. Chris Brookmeyer was there, and I was desperate to say hello to these people, but it's just not me. I'm too shy. So, you know, maybe I'll bump into them at future events, and I'll pluck up the courage to say hello. But no, I just kind of hid in the corner with my author pass and tried not to look like I was like I'd stolen it from someone. Yeah.
Yeah, I tell people I'm shy and they don't believe me, but I really am as well. And I went to Harrogate this year for the first time, which is the first festival I'd ever been to. And I mean, I've interviewed authors, some of the people that I saw, and I was still too shy to go up and say hello, even though technically they should know who I am. So I spoke to them, but yeah.
Well, I remember when I was selected for, so when I read my short story at the book festival in 2015, that was my first taste of all of this. And I was backstage at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and there was Gordon Brown, the ex-Prime Minister, who I didn't care about. And there was Dr. Is it Robert Winston from the TV with the big moustache? He was in another corner. And then again, I didn't really care about that. So none of this was fazing me. I was sat on a little bench with one of my free sandwiches, reading my story over and over. But then who walked past was Patrick Ness, who I adore. I absolutely love Patrick Ness. And it's my big regret to this day that I didn't even just go up, you know, not even for an autograph or anything, or a photograph. I just wish I'd gone up and said thank you for the books, you know, that I really wish I had. But the opportunity passed me by. I was too shy. So I need to get over that, because these opportunities that I've had might never come around again. So I really should be grabbing them. But yeah, so I know exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I got over it a little bit at Bloody Scotland, and I was taking a piss out of Mark Billingham for not remembering my name. So you can, and they're so lovely. All of you are so lovely. So no, they won't bite.
Good. Yeah, so those that I did speak to, they were all lovely. Certainly, I enjoyed the little interactions that I had, and the organisers there are also authors, and it was lovely seeing them. And I've been chatting to them on Twitter and on email for all this time. So to actually put some, to meet them in person was lovely. And for them to get to know me a little bit can only be a good thing. Maybe they'll be introduced, maybe I'll be invited back for different things. And I guess being an ex-police officer, it may be useful to have that perspective for them. Fingers crossed that I'll come back and give my input into crime fiction from the other side.
Do you know who Sharon Bearden? Did you see Sharon Bearden?
I didn't know.
She, I interviewed her last year, and her dream was to be on a panel at Bloody Scotland, which she was this year. But she started off as a blogger, and then she wrote a book. So she attended Bloody Scotland for years because she's a mad blogger. She went to all the festivals, and then she achieved her dream and she got to be on a panel this year.
Oh, fantastic! That's lovely.
So you never know in your future.
Absolutely, yeah. So keep working.
Yeah. And do you, or have you had much feedback from readers so far?
The feedback that I have seen is lovely, but I avoid reviews like the plague. Now and again, I'll get the odd message through my website or on Twitter, and it's lovely, and it's a real thrill. And in fact, the last one that I had was there was an article came out here in the evening newspaper when the first novel came out in the cold, and I was interviewed by a local paper here in Edinburgh. And they did a lovely, huge spread on the release of the first book, and they grabbed hold of the Stephen King angle, and they kind of ran riot with it a little bit. And so around the world, Stephen King fan pages, bloggers have been grabbing a hold of this. And I suddenly got this email in broken English from Buenos Aires, because the article had been rehashed in a magazine in Argentina about the Stephen King connection. And so I had a message from someone there asking, that the book's only in English, will it be coming out in Spanish? And so the interaction has been really lovely. But yeah, I do avoid reviews. So you'll have to tell me if it's doing well, but I think it's doing okay. Certainly if the publishers are wanting me to write a third book, and talking about a new contract, then they seems to be doing okay. So yeah, I just have to assume that the reviews aren't too horrible.
Yeah, I'm intrigued now. I want to go look.
Yeah, don't tell me.
You're never going to be tempted. One day you've got to, surely. You've got to go check them out.
Well, my theory is because I could, if I sat and read reviews, when the Stephen King book came out, I did read reviews, and you would read 10 lovely reviews, and then you read one horrible review, and that's the only one that you would remember, and it would sit with you all day. And so I thought, well, if I can't handle reading bad reviews, then I don't deserve to read the good ones. You can't live life like that. I think you have to accept everything or just stay off of it. So I stay off of it. I don't go near that stuff. I just keep working hard, and we'll see where it takes us.
Just looking. I mean, I couldn't resist. 5 star, 5 star, 5 star, 5 star, 5 star, 5 star, 5 star. Bloody hell, man. Yeah, you should read your reviews. They're pretty good.
I'll take your word for it. I'll just keep working, and as long as the publisher are asking for more, then I know I'm going in the right direction. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, literally, that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The first 8 are all 5 star reviews, so I think you're fine. I think you've got this.
That's we're doing something right. That's good.
Yeah, well, you are. I'm just talking to you. Is there a standout moment, as you've obviously had quite a few cool moments so far since you became an author? Is there one that stands out more than anything else?
It's hard to beat a personal message from Stephen King in a book. There's been so many lovely little moments Yeah, signing books at bloody Scotland and being on stage there is fantastic. Being on stage at the Edinburgh Book Festival, finding out that I just got a book deal, getting the cover art through for the book, opening. There's a big thing on Twitter with authors opening boxes of their book when it arrives, and I started calling it my what do I call it? I call it my George McFly Day. I think it's gathered a little bit of momentum. I think other authors are calling it George McFly Day, because I don't know if you remember the film Back to the Future, but when I was a kid, how old was I when Back to the Future came out? So 1985, I was 8 years old when Back to the Future came out, and this goes back to the previous point when I said that the first thing I ever wanted to do was to write books. And so the end of the movie, when Marty McFly wakes up in his bed and everything is perfect, and he goes downstairs and there's his dad opening a box of his own books. And I remember saying to my mum, how cool would that be to open a box of your own books? And so I call it George McFly Day when those books turn up, and they're really special moments to me. You get this profound clarity moment where everything's happened in a bit of a haze, and you walk into Waterstones and your book is on the shelf, which is just nuts. But that moment of opening a box of your own books because of that movie, and that dream that kind of sat with me from when I was 8 years old, is a special moment. So I will always be I'll always be tweeting about my George McFly days. They're really special.
Yeah, I might have to go back and watch that. I won't tell you how old I was in 1985. I was just a little bit younger. Not much. I was alive, so. But yeah, too young to be watching Back to the Future.
I think somebody described it. I can't remember who. Was it Mark Kermode described it as the perfect movie? It's hard to argue, I think.
Yeah, it's awesome. Characters and actors and stuff. Yeah, it's great. It's good.
A lovely round narrative, which you have to love.
Which puts me off again, asking. I don't know. I'm so easily distracted. Okay, so apart from your shop and your son and your writing, what do you enjoy doing?
There's not much time left, Donna.
No, I didn't think there would be.
When the world isn't burning, Edinburgh is a lovely city to be out and about in, to go and get something to eat, to go for a walk, and I do a lot of running, because I love all that eating. So you have to flip that coin, and so I do a lot of running. I read as much as I can whenever I can, and that sounds like about 30 hours a day. So you need to try and kind of squeeze all that in. But yeah, since the wee fella came along, then there's not much time for much else. So yeah, you find me rushing back from work, kind of usually around sort of 2 or 3 p.m. And I quickly, dump my bag, change to my other bag with my laptop, run to the cafe, sit down with my cup of tea, and that's me until they kick me out. They usually start making noises around. They start banging on the coffee machine pretty hard about 5 minutes before I know that the polite "please get out of our establishment" comes along, and that's me. That's work. But I wouldn't change it. It's between all the doggy cuddles I get at the shop, and all of this stuff that happens as a result of writing the stories. I'm very lucky. So no complaints about being busy, particularly in 2021. There's I'll never complain about being busy, not at all.
It's funny you say about the coffee. At work, I turn the lights off. I tell you what, it works a treat every time, especially when you do it and someone's in the shop.
Yeah, that's the pub tactic, isn't it? Yeah, or you turn all the lights on in the pub. That's the opposite, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, it works an absolute treat every time. It does make me laugh. Yeah, I just want to go home. That's fair enough, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
If you were able to travel to any period of time, either forwards or backwards, where would you like to go?
Well, do you know, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, about how unstable the world feels right now. But when I was a kid, in between, the 80s and 90s, things just felt so stable and safe. And I'd probably go back there. The early 90s, when the music was really good. When I was 14, the whole grunge thing was happening. And so all of my friends and I, we got really into Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Sonic Youth. And I'd go back there when the world was safe, and the music was good. There was a music scene, and yeah, I'd probably go back there and hang out with those guys again. It's probably a little bit boring. It's probably more interesting times and kind of far off history, but I just go back to when the world wasn't burning and everything was pretty cool. So 1992, let's go there.
See, I remember the music as the 90s being rubbish. I don't know if it's I was slightly younger. But
maybe it depends what scene you were into, I think. But the whole alternative thing from the States in Seattle was just, I think I always think of it as the last proper music scene before things got a bit weird, and albums sort of didn't really come out anymore, and now it's all kind of singles and shuffle culture and so on. But I remember, to tell you a quick story, one of the guys at work, she's so much younger than I am, but we're chatting about music, and I was asking her, what music do you listen to? And she mentioned, she rattled off a number of bands, and I think I knew one of them. And so we got to this conversation about music, modern music, and the stuff that I'm into. And I said it was a shame that shuffle culture had come along, that people don't really sit and listen to albums start to finish, and that bands, sometimes there's a narrative within an album. They're in that series of the sequence, for a reason. And I was saying, that there used to be an unofficial structure to an album, and that you had your number one first track was always the big single off the album, and then your other singles always formed the first side. So the side A of your album was always the kind of all the singles, and on the side B was more for the fans, the kind of Uber fans. You had the more cult songs on there, and then the loudest song of the album is always side one. So there's always song one of side B. And this young lady looked at me and said, and I swear this is true, she said, "What do you mean side B?" Because the earliest she knew was CDs, where there's no such thing as side B. She didn't know about LPs and tapes, and so that was a horrifying moment. She had no idea what side B was.
Yeah, that's a bad time, isn't it? Have you seen a video of kids trying to figure out how a tape works and how to get music out of it? Yeah. Oh my god, it'll make you want to cry. It's so depressing. They're like holding it up to their ear, and they're saying they put their earphones. Oh my god.
Oh god, yeah, that'll make you feel old in a minute.
Yeah, because I was a mature student. My uni friends generally asked me how we used to do our homework before the internet. How do you think? We had to manage. It was fine. We coped with, Encyclopedia Britannica and libraries and stuff and pen and paper.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was.
You had to read the whole textbook, not just the Wikipedia page. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a depressing conversation. I'm like, and I always kept saying I was old, and they're like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "I am compared to you. I don't even know what you lot are talking about. It's like you're talking another language." But yeah, anyway. I can't think of any more questions unless you think there's anything that I haven't asked you that you want to tell us.
No, I think I rattled through most of my life story in the first 10 minutes. So I think I think that's all I have.
Good stuff. Well, I'm sure I could think of some more stuff to ask you, but we'll wait till your next book's out.
Sure. So the next book, hopefully early next year, I think we'll be looking book 3, and yeah, I'll keep running back from the doggy shop and getting my words down, and yeah, we'll see where it takes us.
Fabulous. Well, before we go, would you like to just remind everyone, if you have a copy of your book to hand, what it looks like, where they can get it from, and where they can find out more about you, if they so wish?
Sure. Yeah, so the first book is out in the cold, available from wherever you buy your books, I think. But by all means, go to your local bookshop and ask them to order it in. If they don't have a copy, just ask them to order it in. They'll get it in within a few days for you. And so that was the first one. Second one was Into the Dark. That's the most recent one that came out in July this year. And again, you don't necessarily have to go online to buy it. You can go into your local bookshop, ask them to get it in for you. I'll be there within a couple of days, so support your local bookshop. If you do want to find a copy of 6 Scary Stories Selected and Introduced by Stephen King, you might have more of a task on your hand. It's available on Amazon through audiobook and ebook, and other places too, maybe, I don't know. And but if you want a physical copy, you have to kind of go to the States, go to the sites in the States to find it. A bit rarer to find one of these in the UK. And yeah, I think that's all I have.
And where can they find about you if you want to, get a bunch of stalkers or something to support you?
Well, you can follow me. I think mostly I'm on Twitter, so you can get me at story_Stuart, at story_Stuart on Twitter, and you can find me there, and you can look back at all the nonsense I've been tweeting, and updates on when new stories are coming out. And I do have a website, which is storystuart.com. And I'm not as active on there as I should be, but details of new publications will be coming out there as well.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good to speak to you.